Hey everybody, welcome back to Laptop Seniors. Today we're going to talk to Mexico Mike, or Malaga Mike, or just plain Mike. Well, Mike and I have worked together for ages, and we've been friends for a really long time. Interestingly, which we'll get into a little bit probably, we and his wife Karen, the four of us went to Boquete ages ago, and to check that out before they settled in Mexico. So a lot of people are definitely interested in Mexico as for retirement, and also Spain. That comes up a lot. So we're going to start out with Mexico and the treks of Mike and Karen. So hey, Mike, how you doing?
Hey, Vivian, how are you?
Great, welcome.
You.
We're really excited to have you here, and our almost 10,000 subscribers. Hi there, and 50,000 viewers. Can you imagine that? Not to make you nervous or anything.
Yeah.
They're in for a real treat with all the information that we know that you can share with us. And so this might be a one-off. We may end up with several videos out of this. So if you haven't subscribed yet, be sure to subscribe and click that bell to be notified.
She wasn't immediate, but now she's selling. She's selling big time. Holy. Okay, so let's go back to actually Boquete, when we all went there, and I'm only mentioning that only because at the time you looked at it and you go like, no, I think we're going to Mexico, and because you had already been to Ajijic a few times. So take us from the point of we looking up at retirement. Where do we go? So take it from there. How did you end up with Ajijic, in Mexico?
Ajijic.
Yeah. It looks like Ajijic. That's what it looks like. Yeah.
5 or 6 years before we retired, we determined, Karen and I, that we didn't want to spend our winters in Canada. We were done with the cold. I no longer played hockey. We didn't ski. So we were looking at potential destinations. And one weekend we were in Schaumburg visiting friends, and they had just come back from Ajijic, visiting friends of theirs who lived there. They started telling us about it. It sounded interesting. It sounded perfect, actually. So we decided, that was, I think, in November. We went and visited Ajijic the first time in May of that year. I had done some research. May is the hottest month in Ajijic, so we wanted to see just how hot was. 2 weeks, and it was spectacular. It's in the 90s or 30s, depending on which scale you use, but very low humidity. Low humidity in the 10-15% range. So, yes.
Wow, that's really low.
Yeah, it's hot when you're in the sun, but you just put a hat on or you stay in the shade, and it's not that overwhelming humidity that we get in Toronto. So we checked it out. We went again at Christmas to see what it was like, and just decided, it had a good feel. It's a small town, only 10,500 people, but it felt safe. It felt friendly, and most important at that time, it's close to the Guadalajara airport, because we didn't intend to live there full time. It was going to be a 6 or 7 month a year thing, come back to our cottage in Canada for the summer months. So we needed to be near an international airport. So that's how we determined Ajijic. You mentioned Boquete, and I liked Boquete when we went there, but too far removed, too far to go into Panama City, and a little at the time. I understand, based on what you guys have been saying, that it has changed, but a little underdeveloped at
Yes.
the time we visited there.
Yes.
And I believe that was back in 2013 when we went together for the first time.
13, 14, somewhere in there.
Somewhere in that range, yeah.
Yeah. And it was. I mean, now there's, I don't know, they say there's like 70 restaurants there. I think when we were there it felt like maybe 5, which means there were probably 15.
Yeah.
Ones you can't see, some fondas and stuff like that. But yeah.
Can I just step back for a second and ask you a little bit more about your process of how you even determined that you could retire at the point that you did? Like what was the thinking that you went through, and what did you have to figure out to say the time is right?
We didn't really put a date on retirement. Mm-hmm. We knew that we would work as long as we could and as long as we wanted to. But as Pat well knows, the media industry was in a decline. We were fortunate to come into outdoor advertising, TV advertising, radio advertising when it was at its zenith. Mm-hmm. And as audience started disappearing, people like me I made too much money, is the reality. I mean, they could get rid of me and hire 2 or 3 people to do my job, or not replace me and have one person do multiple jobs. So we didn't really have a date picked for retirement. We just thought probably our mid-60s. We were feverishly saving and hoping to have enough money to not change our lifestyle when we did retire. And then it just so happened that where I ended up working last, I just couldn't tolerate the ownership of the company, and it was time to say goodbye. I didn't want to become one of those managers that I'd had when I was a sales rep that I thought should have left the business years ago, but were hanging on because they needed a paycheck. I was determined I wasn't going to do that. Karen was involved in an association business, and she was running 90 miles an hour and getting tired. So we just looked at each other one day and said, okay, it's time.
When you hit the wall, it's like, okay, we're done.
Yeah.
Moving on.
Now, because the 2 of you obviously were retiring together, did you find that you had any differences in the criteria of what the place you wanted to retire to was all about? Did one of you want more of a city, more of a rural, or?
Well, we were both in agreement that Ajijic was where we wanted to go. We had really no idea what it was going to be like. You all have dreams about how retirement's going to go, but then reality hits you and you realize, I didn't realize this about that. But we had determined that we would give Ajijic a try. We like the climate. It's rated as the 2nd best climate in the world. And I didn't realize just how much that meant to me. But now we'll talk about it a little while later. But moving to Spain, Mediterranean climate, you'd think, well, that's got to be great. Ajijic leaves Spain's climate in the dust. So we got there. We liked the feel of it. And then it was, okay, now what are we going to do?
Let's go to the beginning of you going to Mexico. If memory serves me correct, you guys going to Mexico did the immigration yourself. You didn't use a lawyer, or you did the brunt of it. Am I correct?
We did it all. It was, at the time, I understand things have gotten a little more complex going to Mexico, but at the time, it was very straightforward and easy. I think we went to the Mexican consulate in June to tell them we wanted to emigrate. They gave us the paperwork, told us what we needed to do. We took that back in November. You've got to get a police check, a variety of things, birth certificates, wedding license, all of that. And prove, at the time, you only had to prove that you had a family income of, I think it was 1,800 Canadian dollars a month. We took all of that in November. We got notified that our visas allowing us to go to Mexico would be ready December 15th. It turned out it was a couple of weeks later, but yeah, it was, we did it all. Once you get into the country, you have 30 days to register at a Mexican government office, telling them that, okay, I've got my card. It's not a permanente. It's an application for a permanente. You've got to go to an office within 30 days and register And then I think it was about the beginning of March that we got our Residente Permanente cards.
Wow, that happened really fast, and it doesn't sound complicated at all.
Yeah,
It
and those,
wasn't, and Karen had studied Spanish considerably before we went. I was a little bit rusty, but we went. We didn't hire anybody. We didn't. We did it all ourselves. Most of the Mexican people in the government jobs, if they couldn't speak English, they would find someone. If we were having trouble understanding what it was they were asking, they would find somebody in the office who had a little bit of English. So yeah, it was. I've heard nightmares from people who have done it since, but we were fortunate.
it seems like it really depends on the consulate that you go to and what you encounter with those people there. And they definitely you raise the minimum requirement for income for sure.
Yeah.
I've seen it higher as high in some places. It's like 3,800 U.S., not Canadian either. 3,800 U.S. You know, and so it seems like it's depending on what consulate you go into or embassy. It could be anywhere at this point between 2,500 and $4,000.
Yeah.
Which is,
That's a good point. When we were living there, we met a couple of American sisters that had moved down. That in fact, they moved into the house that we had given up. We'd moved down into the casita on the property, and the younger one just living on her U.S. Social Security. And now that you mention it, when she went to apply for her permanente, she didn't have enough income. So she's actually living there, probably illegally, or going back every 6 months or whatever for a few weeks and then coming back. So yes, it's gone up considerably.
Yeah, that makes it tough on people, especially like you say, if your only income is your Social Security.
Yeah.
So, Mike, what about taxes? Because that always comes up. Like, people want to know if is there tax treaties? Do I have to pay for this country and that country, or all of that stuff? How the Mexican tax system? How does that work?
Well, Canada and the U.S. have reciprocal tax agreements with Mexico, which basically states that if you're a Canadian and you're not paying taxes in Canada, then you have to pay taxes in Mexico on all of your worldwide income. Same in the U.S. But in Mexico, if you can prove that you are paying taxes in another country, your home country, as I was in Canada, then you're not obliged to pay Mexican income tax unless you're earning money in Mexico doing something, selling real estate or whatever, and then you're taxed on whatever you earn there.
Right, and they probably set that up for snowbirds who maybe are there longer than 6 months. They're maybe there 7 months or something, and they own property and all that sort of stuff. Now, you guys packed, or you, well, I'm sure the both of you packed and loaded that car that you used to have and figure you're going to drive it down there and use it there, then that would be a logical thing to explain. But I remember you used to have you had a ton of problems at the Texas border taking it into
importing your car.
Is it hard to import a car into Canada? Normally, I mean, I know you guys have
into Mexico.
Into Mexico, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's not difficult. It's just at the time, the Mexican government changed the year that the oldest vehicle that they would allow in without huge taxes. The reason is that there's a very large and well-to-do automotive dealership business in Mexico. A lot of very wealthy Mexicans who have a lot of sway in the government, I guess. And they said, hey, you're letting these people come in and they're buying their new cars in whatever city they're in and driving them down here. And what about us? So I had a 2010 Ford. And that year, the government, unbeknownst to anyone, except me when I got to the border, was they changed that to 2013 or 2014. So my car wasn't going in. I fortunately found a place that I could store it while I figured out how to get it in. I'd hired a guy to come up and help me bring it across. He specialized in doing the paperwork to import vehicles. So fortunately, he was there with his van and his girlfriend. He was bringing her up so she could shop in Mexico, or American City, for the day in Laredo. Originally, he was going to take a bus up, but then his girlfriend decided she wanted to come, so he brought his van. So fortunately, everything I had stuffed in the car, I was able to get into the
Right.
van, and we arrived in Ajijic 8 or 9 hours later, and
Great. Did you find it difficult getting around in Ajijic without a car for 6 months?
I bought a car right away. If you live
So
right in
you,
the center of Ajijic, you could get around on foot, but it would be a workout because cabs are not prevalent. There are some, but they keep odd hours. Uber doesn't exist. The major shopping center in the town is the Walmart. It would be too far to walk and take your groceries, so you pretty much need a car.
and is there public transit?
No.
Not at all.
Really? Wow, that's interesting. Huh.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So as I keep in mind, it's only 10,500 people. It's a small Mexican village. It just happens to be filled with expats.
yeah.
Hmm.
Well, let's talk about Ajijic and then in Mexico too, because I'm sure they're going to intersperse in between. So Ajijic, I'll just throw a bunch of things at it, and you can just go. Easy to meet other expats. Safety. These are the things that people always want to know. How hard is it to make friends? So the expat thing. Are there many? How safe is it? Did you feel safe? All that sort of stuff. Restaurants. Can you eat out? What's that like or not like? And you already mentioned it was a small town, and we went down and visited
Yeah.
Mike and Karen, and it's a cool little town. It was neat. And the Lake Chapala was beautiful, and it had a Costco, as I recall.
Costco's in Guadalajara. It has
Oh,
Walmart.
Guadalajara.
So,
Yeah,
okay, so that was the
but,
Walmart that we went to then.
the
Yeah, it
Costco
was.
is about a 45, 50-minute drive into Guadalajara. But Guadalajara is, the first time you drive in a major Mexican city, getting used to the traffic circles. I've driven in traffic circles in many countries in the world. I've never run across a traffic circle that actually had traffic lights in it. Mexico.
Oh,
Yeah,
we've seen a few.
so
They're
you,
very confusing.
yeah. And I thought, well, that's odd. But now I'm living in Spain. I realize where the Mexicans got it. They do it here in Spain.
Hmm,
Mm.
But once
interesting.
you get used to Guadalajara, and there were lots of expats who didn't. There was an organization called the Lake Chapala Society. It's an outfit organized. You can join it as an expat, and their primary focus is a meeting place for expats, and then helping the local Mexicans. So they run a huge amount of charity events for the local Mexicans, but they also help the local expats, and they about once a month rent a bus, and you can sign up and you can take a bus and go into Costco and buy your groceries there, and they'll drive you back home and drop you
Hmm.
off. But if you want to go through the things that you listed, first of all, meeting people, there's a ton of expats. In fact, it's one of the reasons we chose to leave Mexico, because it's overrun with expats. It's become,
Wow.
it's unfortunately, and it's a worldwide problem now. We're having expat problems here and in Spain, but it felt at times like we were living in a senior citizen residence of about 10,000 people. Everywhere you went,
Mm.
it's expat Americans and Canadians. The restaurants are full of them. The streets are full of them. The golf course is full of them. The tennis courts are full of them. And to the point where it didn't really, other than that you had Mexican gardeners and cleaning ladies, and you saw Mexicans on the street and they were behind the tills, you never saw them at any of the things that I was doing. They were always the service people. So
Mhm.
it became, it didn't feel like we were in Mexico. It felt
Hmm.
the other way around. It was odd. But you can meet people, and for a lot of people, that's the safety in numbers thing is why they're there. You don't have to learn Spanish. Karen and I worked on Spanish, and we used our Spanish wherever we could. But you could honestly get by in Ajijic without a word of Spanish.
Wow, that's interesting. And I know, to your point of being exposed mainly to expats, that Karen in particular did a lot of charity work with local groups, which
With
was
that group, yeah.
wonderful
Yeah.
that she did that. But that obviously got you more into the local community.
Yes, well, it's the local community of expats, because we were never in. I don't think we were in one Mexican home the entire time we were there.
Wow.
Maybe once. Once our cleaning lady's mother died, and Karen went to the wake to her home. And I went to our gardener Ismail. I would pick him up sometimes and take him home because he had a bit of a bad hip, but I was never invited in. And I think primarily because they're embarrassed about their standard of living. I mean, it's a poor community, right? You hear the statistics, and it doesn't really ring true until you sort of live in it. The average Mexican wage is $6 a day. So you
That's
can
a
imagine,
latte at
Wow.
Starbucks.
yeah, yeah.
Scary.
So,
Wow.
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
so as far as safety goes, Ajijic felt as safe as I ever felt anywhere I've ever been in the world, including in Toronto and Oakville, Burlington, the places I've lived. Um, yes, there is the occasional crime in Ajijic. The cartels do exist, and Guadalajara is a center for cartels. And every once in a while, somebody will have done something, probably didn't pay enough for the drugs or stole drugs. And occasionally there were people being killed, but it was far fewer deaths than most Canadian and American cities would see in a year. I never felt uncomfortable going anywhere at any time of the night or day in the town. As far as driving, the only place I would ever drive to after dark would be Guadalajara because it's a well-lit highway, it's well policed, but I would never drive over to Puerto Vallarta after dark or anywhere else in Mexico after dark because that's when the banditos take over and the impersonating cops and all of that. And that's when the real danger starts. Restaurants, there were over 100 in a town of 10,500 people. There were over 100 restaurants.
Wow.
Wow.
Didn't realize there were that many.
Yeah. When we were there, we'd be visiting you guys, although that was a lot of years ago. Well, I guess it was
Now they're
4 or 5
there.
years.
We just didn't take you to a lot of them, but they're sprinkled through. And when I say Ajijic, when you come down the Libramiento, the bypass that takes you from the highway, from the Guadalajara highway, into Ajijic, as opposed to following it around and going into Chapala, which is at the east end of the lake, and then driving along the north shore of the lake over to Ajijic. You can bypass that and go down. From there to the end of the lake, Jocotepec, at the west end, is about 45,000 people. So they're little villages. The town of Ajijic itself is 10,500, but lots of people in the area live maybe 200 meters outside of Ajijic or in San Juan, Tlacopan or whatever. But people just generally call it Ajijic. So, but
Mhm.
there were lots of restaurants and probably 15 or 20 that would be considered 4-star. I don't think we had any. There was one that he liked to talk up the fact that he was a 5-star, but we'd eaten it a couple of times. But it was good food. But there were lots of what I would say 4-star. But when you went into those restaurants, you never saw a Mexican. You might see a Mexican doctor, you might see a Mexican lawyer, but if there were 100 people in there, maybe 10% or less would be Mexican because it's a poor town.
Wow. So, having told us about the very low income rates of the locals there in Ajijic, and having told us that you did very well when you were working, I imagine that your lifestyle, leaving Canada and going to Mexico, was at least the same or better there.
Yeah, the as far as food and entertainment, way cheaper than Canada. The
It's
one
insane in Canada now.
Yeah,
Canadian,
well, and it's insane in Mexico now, and it's insane in Spain right now too. The one
wow.
thing that wasn't cheaper in Mexico was housing, rental housing. We never intended to buy, but when we originally went there, we rented a place for 1,500 Canadian dollars.
And that was in 2016?
2014. We rented it
14.
in 2014. At that time, believe it or not, the Canadian dollar was on par with the US dollar. So 1,500 Canadian dollars a month for a nice place with a casita, a driveway, all of that seemed pretty good. By the time we
You had a walled compound too,
yeah,
which was
yeah,
cool. Yeah.
It was a
Yeah.
beautiful home
Yeah. It was
that
like
you
it was
rented.
like an estate actually.
yeah, it
It
was
was pretty spectacular.
double car garage, everything, and close enough that I could walk into town. We were on the west end of town, but I could walk. By the time we moved there in January, the Canadian dollar was 30% less. So now that 1,500 Canadian dollars was going to be 18 or 1,900 Canadian dollars. The landlord nicely dropped our rent to $13.50, understanding the situation and that we were retiring. But now apparently the rents are through the roof. That place that we rented is now going for $2,400 a month. That was the one negative, is that because of all of the influx of expats, it was cheaper for the Americans, especially coming in where the American dollar is the end all and the be all currency.
Mm-hmm.
That's why so many are there now, because they're living on Social Security plus maybe a little bit of savings. They can afford something there. They can afford to live. So they were doing fine, but they were also driving the price of housing up because they could afford it. The Mexican people that did own the homes, they're not stupid. They want to make money. So, you can pay it. Okay, I'll charge you more. When they find out, okay, that tenant leaves and they were happy to pay X, then I'll do X plus whatever. So it's become expensive. In fact, friends of ours just emailed me the other day, and they're leaving Ajijic, and he said he's married a Mexican woman. He said it's just become untenable. That's not uncommon to Mexico. We've got problems here in Spain. Barcelona, there's people right now yesterday squirting tourists with squirt guns. Protesters walking down the main tourist restaurant areas with heavy-duty squirt guns and blasting at the people eating out in the restaurants in the tourist areas, telling them to go home. They don't want them.
Wow.
Mallorca's having problems. They're considering limiting cruise ships. Amsterdam is limiting cruise ships. Amsterdam has made partying, stag and doe parties, illegal because it's a favorite haunt for Brits to go over there and have their hee-haw moment before they get married. So it's Malaga. Malaga's rents are crazy. When 2 years ago when we started looking here, we found a place on the sea, a little bit west of town, for 1,500 euros a month. That place is now 2,400 euros a month in 2 years.
Wow.
Yes.
That's a jump. Holy, that's a big jump.
That's a huge jump. The place that we rented when we first came here was 1,800 euros a month plus utilities. We found a nicer place further east in the old city at much less money. They raised the rent from 1,800 to 2,200 and had it rented before we even left the place.
Mm-hmm.
There's big demand. So so Mexico is experiencing the same problem. There's people from higher income countries like Canada and the U.S., Great Britain, Japan, that have money. They may not be wealthy, but they can afford to pay the rents. And so unfortunately, it's forcing here in Malaga, it's forcing people that have lived in the core for most of their lives to have to leave and move into the outskirts and away from their jobs, away from their family connections. So there's an anti-expat, anti-tourist thing happening worldwide, and we're feeling it here.
Yeah, it's funny. The last video that we did, I kind of went down that path directly because we had a comment on one of our videos, and the person was talking about how hard it was, how scary it was for them to make ends meet in the U.S. Like they're right on the edge, and their savings are being depleted every day because they have to take out a savings to exist, that kind of thing. And there was over 400 comments on their comment, which I've never seen before, agreeing with them and then telling their story about the whole thing.
Yeah.
And and it's like, big problem. And as you say, it's worldwide. It's a weird dynamic that there's a ton of young people from, let's just say, poorer countries or lower cost countries, whatever, trying to get into North America to earn money, and then the ones at the other end of their life are like, I got some savings, but I can't make it here. I got to go to where those countries are.
Yeah.
It's like a two-way street going, depending on your age, and it's weird. It's a strange time, but people are, we see it in Panama too, and in Moquete and other places. I think a North American person gets used to a particular way of living. The apartment looks the same, the kitchens look the same, the houses look the same, and they're looking for that. And there's only so many of them in those other countries. and they just drive the price up because
Yeah.
like somebody
Yeah.
coming from Toronto, you got $1 million home that's, could be a knockdown anywhere else. And you go like, well, what do you want? 400 grand. Yeah, sure. Whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
strange.
exactly it. And it's, I don't know what the solution is, because if I were a landowner here and I could sell my place and make a handsome profit, same as I would in Canada, I would want to do that. But
Mhm.
it's contributing to the alienation of people
Yeah.
towards people like us. Used to be the lifeblood of a country. Now they don't want to see. In Mexico, you're a gringo. In Spain, you're a guiri. They don't want to see the guiris so much. We've got
Mhm.
we've got Spanish friends here. We've met and been in the homes of Spanish people, and we're part of a group of probably 20 or 30 expat and Spanish families. So it's not everybody that is anti-expat, but I'm certain that the poorer ones are feeling it, because there was a sign in the old neighborhood that we lived in. The area was called Purchel Sur, South Purchel. And there was a sign between two buildings that I used to walk by every day. It was just a sort of a banner that somebody had created. It said, Purchel Sur no se vende. South Purchel is not for sale.
Mhm.
Always get lost. Don't
Mhm.
don't be knocking
Mhm.
down these buildings or renovating them and jacking the rents up, because we can't afford to live here anymore.
Can we just skip back to Ajijic for a
Yeah,
minute? There's just
sure.
a couple of other things I wanted to ask to share with our viewers about it. So, you and Karen are very active. You walk, you exercise, you golf. And so, mobility issues are not an issue for you guys. And I know that you walk the streets every day for exercise. How are the sidewalks and roads for people that might have mobility issues?
In Ajijic, not good. There's a lot of cobblestone, first of all, and the cobblestone, even for people with good mobility, is dangerous, because it's not level. It's not the kind of cobblestone that you would see in Britain, for instance, where the streets, it's almost like pavement. This is cobblestone that is rough and raw, and some stones are sticking up an inch, some are down a half inch. So anybody walking with a cane or a walker is going to have difficulty. The sidewalks are in rough shape. At least they were the last time I was there, a couple
Mhm.
years ago, and can end abruptly. They can just, all of a sudden, it got broken up, and so now you've got to go out onto the street. So it's unfortunately not a good city for town for people with handicaps that are restricted in their mobility.
Okay, well, that's good to know for some people. And then I don't know if you remember when we were on a shared trip in Playa del Carmen at one point. We were out for the evening and I ended up slamming my finger in the taxi door. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. Well,
I don't remember that.
I
That's
had
weird.
to I had to go to a clinic and get a couple of stitches and tetanus shot and so on. And I recall that experience being so good for healthcare. Um, we didn't, we had travel insurance, but didn't end up using it, just paid cash to me. So there was an injection, there were a few stitches. The doctor saw me almost immediately when we walked in. And we were out of there, I want to say, in half an hour, fully cared for. And the bill, as I recall, was under $100 US. So that experience told me that, well, even without healthcare for many issues, at least incidental things, you probably can just pay out of pocket. What's your experience with healthcare in Mexico?
Well, living in Ajijic, we bought out of country medical insurance, but it had a copay, it had deductibles, and it would only be really good if you were in a serious car accident or had a heart attack or a stroke, where you were going to be ambulanced into a hospital and be there for some time. Otherwise, we just paid out of pocket. A trip to our doctor, our GP, was 300 pesos, so $18. at the time.
Wow.
Prescriptions, interestingly, they would write you a prescription, but you never had to then go back and get a renewal. You just kept the prescription and you would take it into the drugstore. So if you were, I take regular medication for things like high blood pressure. I went to see a doctor once about that, and after that, I just walk into the local pharmacy and show them, or tell them. I didn't even have to show them. If I know the name of the drug and how many milligrams, I would just say, then go get it and give it to me. And they were relatively inexpensive. The healthcare in Ajijic is excellent. There's an Ajijic Central Hospital. It's a small clinic. There's a couple of doctors that have opened up another full-scale hospital a little west of town, and there's another full-scale hospital opened up on the Libramento coming into town. So for healthcare, for serious or minor, it's all there. There's every specialist you can find. Karen had to have an MRI once for something, and she got it in 3 days, and that wasn't covered under our health insurance. And I think we paid 850 Canadian dollars for an MRI, which seemed fairly reasonable to me, given what it would be if you were in the U.S. or Canada.
I know you guys went to Merida and Puerto Vallarta and some other places. I'm just curious for anybody watching, if you were to consider some other place besides Ajijic to live, where, did any place sort of stick out like, oh, that might be cool, we would move there?
Yeah.
Well, I know you guys drove to meet us in Puerto Vallarta a couple of times.
Yeah.
You've been many other places.
Puerto Vallarta is a great city. It's one that we would definitely have considered. There's lots of expats, but the expats are such a small part of the overall population that you still feel like you're in Mexico. Yet they're a large enough percentage of the population that they've done good things for the restaurant business and the hospitality business. So they've raised the level without overrunning the place. There's access to lots of reasonably priced sporting like tennis and golf. There's lots of access to things like Costco that you can get to easily without having to drive into Guadalajara, that kind of thing. The people are friendly. It's I think rated the second safest city in Mexico. The overwhelming problem is the heat. For 6 months of the year, the heat and humidity, minimum 6 months, it can be as much as 8 or 9 months, is overpowering. And well, we were there once, remember, in October.
No, it was hot. It was hot and sticky.
It's supposed to be the end of it. And it was still, as long as we were just walking, it was okay. But if you were into golf or tennis or anything, there's not a chance you could have played and done any of that in that weather. So yes, we checked out Puerto Vallarta, and we really liked it. And on top of that, the housing prices in Puerto Vallarta are much more reasonable because the expats haven't been able to drive the prices up. So you can live in a neighborhood and be paying probably the equivalent of less than 1,000 Canadian dollars a month in a nice, safe area. We looked at Merida. Really liked Merida. City of over 1 million people, rated the most safe city in Mexico, by the way. Capital of the Yucatan. Only 40 minutes from Progreso on the Gulf Coast. 3.5 hours if you wanted to drive to Cancun. You can be in the Mayan Riviera. Again, all kinds of shops and services and things that you would be used to having in Canada, you could get there. The people were friendly, very safe. Lots to do. There's because of the size. There are museums and things like cultural things that you can see. But again, the temperature in Merida is sort of around 29 degrees Celsius year round. That's the lowest. Then it goes up from there. So it's just it's overwhelming for us. We just couldn't consider it. It'd be living indoors for 6 or 7 months of the year minimum.
Right, with air. Yeah. Probably. I would think your air conditioning costs would be a fortune too.
Yeah. The other thing that we needed was a city that was near a major international airport, because we were still going back to Canada for 5 months of the year. San Miguel de Allende. Again, not easy to get to, but a large expat population. But even while we were there, and this was before Ajijic started feeling overrun, it felt to me like San Miguel was overrun. It was expensive. Karen went and had a manicure pedicure there, and she paid as much as she pays in Toronto. We pay in Ajijic she was paying like an eighth of what she would pay in Toronto for a manicure pedicure. So it just seemed out of control already in San Miguel, and we were trying to get away from that. So
Yeah. I wonder if the size of a city is sort of the dictator of whether the expats are going to overrun it or not. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think you'd ever hear like too many expats in Mexico City. I mean, there's
no,
like 25 million people there.
yeah,
That would be a physical, you'd have to move like half of Europe there, in order to
yeah,
overrun this,
yeah. No,
overrun the city.
I agree. I think you're right. That's why I think Puerto Vallarta is so nice because
Yeah.
a lot of expats, but they're still a small percentage. So they're big enough percent to have affected the quality of things, but not enough that you feel like you're not in.
Hmm. Yeah. Although Malaga's that's not a small city either, though. So I guess maybe it doesn't hold true there.
Yeah, so ultimately you stayed 6 years in Ajijic. At what point during that time did you decide that you want to stay full time and not come back to your cottage?
Well, we really hadn't really thought about it. It was just sort of, we're okay here, and we still have family in Toronto that we wanted to go back and see. But we found out because COVID hit, and we decided we weren't risking. I mean, Mexico, you've been in the Mexico City airport. That's not a
Mhm.
place you want to be during COVID.
Mhm.
Right.
So we stayed the entire year in Mexico, didn't go back, went back the next year, back to Canada. And it was only during that time, sort of in COVID, when we were there every day, that we started realizing how crowded. Where we lived in the west end of town.
Yeah.
Mhm.
To get to the Libramiento, if I was going there at 11 p.m. at night by car, which is the main exit out of town to go into Guadalajara, would be 5 to 7 minute drive max. During the day, 25 minutes.
Wow.
Ooh.
That's how much traffic. There's too many people here. It was sort of in that last year that we started seriously thinking about, well, if not here, where?
Let me go back just a little bit, Mike, to things to do in Ajijic, obviously a small town, and the restaurants, because I know restaurants come up a lot. So a nice, not a crazy awesome, not a really, down and dirty,
Fancy pants restaurant.
getting a snack type thing, like just a regular middle class type meal type thing. What would that cost?
Yes. I would say at the better restaurants, if you were ordering a bottle of wine, have a couple of cocktails, maybe a bottle of wine or two bottles of wine, and a full meal,
Yeah.
it might be 50 or $60 Canadian.
Wow. So that's like
Ooh.
42 bucks American. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And
Interesting.
there are lots of restaurants there where you could have, if you cut back on the cocktails and the wine and just had one glass of wine, where it could be 25 to $30 Canadian.
And you're talking for the two of you.
That's for the two of us, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, because the food is, I mean, if you're eating Mexican style food, and that's what many of the restaurants serve, it's heavy duty with tortillas and beans and things like that.
Hmm.
If you wanted to go to the best steakhouse restaurant in town, it's truly Spanish Mexican steakhouse. It would be the most expensive place in town, and it would probably, with wine, etc., would be over $100 for two people.
Okay. 100 Canadian.
It might be
100.
150 because they're buying Angus beef from the U.S. They're not using
Right. So,
And
and you're saying 100 Canadian ish.
yes,
So it'll
yes,
be like 75 American or
yeah.
something like that.
But,
Okay.
but
Cool.
I mean, we're not big steak eaters, so we would go there maybe once a year and
Hmm.
not have two or three bottles of wine. But it was, I mean, you'd have to book the place 2 or 3 weeks in advance minimum because it was popular on the weekends.
wow.
Ajijic and west of Ajijic, out towards Hocotepec, the lake shore is lined with the big homes of the wealthy Guadalajarans. So Lake
Mm.
Chapala is the weekend retreat for a lot of people from Guadalajara.
Hmm.
So when
Mhm.
they come into town, they want to come into Ajijic and have a meal at the steakhouse. And so it was popular and it was good. But the rest of the places, the other 98, 99, were what I would consider to be mid-level restaurants in Canada and the U.S. Good quality food, good portions. They're not going to have a significant wine list, but you can find something you like, and go away full and not be breaking the bank. In fact, for that reason, the restaurants there, and that's how there can be so many in such a small area, is that the expats eat out a lot. My wife and I, Karen, we don't even here in Malaga, we don't eat out that much because we like to control our diet and therefore our weight.
Right, exactly. Did you find that there was a variety of choices in the kinds of food? I mean, I guess it was mainly Mexican food, but then were you finding like Thai restaurants, Chinese, Mediterranean, different?
Yeah. There would be one or two Chinese restaurants. There would be maybe one Thai restaurant. Most of them would be Mexican with a Texas flavor. So there'd be a burger on the menu, probably. There would be maybe a pasta of some sort on the menu. But then there'd be several Mexican-style dishes on the menu. And virtually every one of those restaurants would have some type of Italian dish on their menu.
Did they make them well? Like, did they taste like good Italian?
Well, I mean, yes, I guess so. I mean, as I say, the restaurants were popular. They were very crowded most of the time, and most of them lasted a long time. They weren't just here for a year and then gone. They've been around. So there were a handful of the most popular places that you would go and see the same people because they'd have a band or something, and so they would be there every Friday and Saturday night listening to the music and eating. But the one thing you have to remember about Ajijic is at 10 o'clock, 10:30, those restaurants are closed. One of the restaurants that we used to go to, I can't remember the name of it now, but on the weekends it had a band, so you could dance if you wanted to. And at 10:30, quarter to 11, we were the last people in there finishing our bottle of wine. It's not like here in Spain where you're eating at 10 or 11 o'clock at night. You don't find that very much in Ajijic.
In exiting Mexico, was there anything that you had to go through with leaving the country? And then do your visas still stand? Would you be able to go back at any point because you already acquired the pensionado visa?
Permanente.
Oh, permanente, sorry.
Our residente permanente is good forever. So we can show up tomorrow and be on it. I still have my Mexican driver's license is still valid for another year. So yes, leaving was like going to Toronto for a weekend. Just never came back. So, and it's we may end up back there one day. Who knows?
Yeah, it's great to have the option, and that's what's always good about getting those permanent visas for different countries, because you never know when something will change, and the way it's going, there could be World War III going on, in Europe, and you might I got to go. I'm going where there's nobody, shooting missiles and stuff. You never know; any of that stuff could come up. Well, thank you for this, Mike. This is really awesome, and for everybody who was curious about Mexico. And in particular, Ajijic. I mean, I think.
Ajijic.
What am I saying? Am I saying it different?
You're saying Ajijic. Ajijic.
Say it, Mike.
Yeah, Ajijic.
Okay, isn't that what I said? Ajijic. Yeah. Well, anyway, what he said. Yeah. And next up we'll do one with Mike about Malaga, because so many people want to know about Spain, because that's another. For so many of the similar reasons, they want to know about Spain, and big tourist destination and a big expat destination there too. So you want to close this baby out?
This has been great, Mike. Thank you so much for all this information. You never know. We may get a bunch of questions that are coming back to you. We might have to come back and do this again on Mexico.
Not anywhere.
Yeah, you won't be Mexico, Mike. You'll be Malaga, Mike. We'll have to do that.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks so much for being with us. Remember to click that subscribe button and to come back and see us again soon. Bye for now, friends. Ooh.